Hello, how's everybody? Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to talk about a paper that comes out of a research stream that I have pursued over the last few years that deals with abusive supervision. Specifically, I'm going to look at the impact of abusive supervision as perceived by subordinates on subordinates' silence behaviors. So, in order to give you some context here, let's look at what an organization typically wants out of its people. We can probably all agree that the world of work has changed over the last decade or so. Things have become much faster, there are more demands on us, we juggle more responsibilities. So in order to have really great functioning organizations, you need people who are plugged in, you need employees who are engaged. But what do we get? Nothing. Silence. Okay, why should we care? Because not speaking up, withholding information, has dire consequences. Some of these examples that I found over the course of the research, especially from the healthcare field, are really scary. So, let's talk about silence. And the reason why we don't know that much about employee silence is that is a literature that only has come online in the last 10 years, and very slowly so. There's a bias in my field that looked always at, or in that my field always looked at employee voice, people speaking up, and the implication has always been that the opposite of not speaking up is silence. And then somebody who's really clever came along and said, no, wait a moment, that is not the case. Not speaking up is not the same as remaining silent. So what you have to do is you have to look at the motivation behind why people remain silent. So what is the motivation for somebody withholding crucial information? If you dig through the existing employee silence literature, especially the anecdotal reports from practitioners, there are two recurring themes coming up over and over again. One is fear. The other one is the negative relationship with one's superiors. For example, in the form of abusive supervision. What is abusive supervision? Basically, when your superior shows sustained hostile behavior towards you of a non-physical kind. So it excludes things like, hitting or throwing things at you. How's that measured? My boss ridicules me, blames me when things goes wrong, lies to me, dresses me down in front of others. So what we were interested in looking at is how does such behavior instill fear in subordinates, which then leads to silence. Let's talk about fear a little bit. If you are anything like our dean, you probably sat there for the last few minutes and said, what the hell is fear? It's a fundamental human emotion that arises because one perceives an existential threat. Teaching evaluations, uncertainty and danger to the self, tenure and promotion, displeasure about the prospects of an undesirable event, faculty meetings, sorry.
I'm marking it down.
And the way we typically react as human beings is we have an avoidance reaction. So we try to extract ourselves from the situation. That is also then the motivation underlying what we call defensive silence behavior. Silence that is motivated by fear. So our model then so far is that abusive supervision instills fear in subordinates, which then leads to fear-based silence on part of the subordinate. Again, an example from healthcare. Of course, there are more components to that. You have to put this in the context. There might be personality or situational factors that enhance or dampen the impact of abusive supervision on defensive silence via fear. For example, we could think that somebody who's very outspoken, who's assertive, who's not shy to assert him or herself, that would lessen the impact of the experienced fear on defensive silence. On the other hand, if you work in a climate of fear, that might increase the strength of that relationship. And this is pretty much what we tested. These are moderators, these two variables, so a moderated mediation model. What did we find? We basically gathered two samples. We had different measurement points in time. And all our hypotheses were supported, meaning that abusive supervision is positively related to fear experienced by the subordinate, is positively related to defensive silence, and is moderated by those two moderators, by those two variables. Meaning that you get the strongest impact when subordinates perceive that there's a high climate of fear, high levels, and when they are low in assertiveness. If you depict this graphically, you do a simple slope, what's called a simple slopes analysis. That's what it looks like. So this is the impact of fear, a high climate of fear, and being low assertiveness, low self-reporting, low levels of assertiveness. All right. So what the study then shows is that two things. Being assertive can act as a buffer to remaining silent. So basically we argue that everybody is going to have a fear reaction due to abusive supervision, but those who are not shy in asserting themselves will nevertheless exhibit a higher likelihood of speaking up. On the other hand, for people who are, or subordinates who are low in assertiveness, working in a climate of fear pronounces the impact. Now, the interesting question is, of course, what should you do if that happens to be you? We have some recommendations from the bullying/mobbing literature on that that I've used. And so what you see next is an amalgamation of this kind of information plus my own personal take on this. I think what you have to do is you have to take into account your situation and the larger context in which you work. So for example, what is the organization's culture? What are the norms, values, and the modus operandi in the organization? How are things done around here, typically? And then what you try to do is you try to align your response with the way that things are typically done in the organization. Sometimes that might actually mean you can't bring it to somebody's attention because you don't do that around here. In which case, I would tell you, go look for a job somewhere else. If you're the person, what you also have to do is you have to be proactive in protecting yourself from the impact of abusive supervision onto yourself. Whatever it takes, getting this adrenaline out of your body, working out, yoga, meditating. Find allies and mentors, but try to be constructive, because at the end of the day you have to realize that even that abusive supervisor is still a human being. So try to understand where the person is coming from. Is there something you can do in order to increase the frequency with which abusive supervision happens? And as a long-term strategy, have a career plan. So if you don't have job alternatives lined up where it's easy for you to move, sit down and develop a long-term perspective for you. Maybe this is a lateral move in the organization, or maybe that might be moving on to a different organization. On the flip side, of course, if you're in a position of influence and power, you want to make sure that that kind of behavior doesn't surface in your organization to begin with. So be mindful that people will pay very, very close attention in an organization of how you deal with conflict, how you deal with the tensions that naturally exist in any organization. Try to role model positive behavior. When things go wrong, step in early and clarify what are the expectations in terms of desirable behavior for my organization. If you screw up, say so. Be honest about it, be forthright, forthcoming, and say, here are the reasons why we handled this, and this way. In 2020 hindsight, that was not the optimal way. Here's how we could have done it better. So use that as a chance, because people will acknowledge you're only human as well. And of course, there are a lot of costs associated with not taking care of those abusive supervisors in your organization. Robert Sutton, who's a professor at the University of California, wrote a book, and you saw the title, so I will not say it out loud. But he's dead serious about this. And he said, not taking care of these toxic elements in the organization has great costs associated with it, some of which he lists there. Thank you so much.